So we're letting you in. We'll kick off any second. So let's get started now then, actually. I'm assuming for the moment that we're all kind of Zoom experts, so I won't do a lengthy briefing apart from reminding you to keep the camera on, please, because it helps us keep the conversation going, but also to stay mute as well so that we don't hear you eating crisps or slurping your gin and tonic or crunching biscuits or whatever you're going to do. So the only thing I would actually ask you to remind you of, obviously, with Zoom, for those of you who aren't used to using it, Zoom is quite power hungry. So if you're operating off a battery powered device, just keep an eye on the battery level. The aim for Chat and Connect is to try and get away from the standard networking event. What we try and do is we've got some guests, which we'll introduce properly to you in a moment. And we'll get them chatting about tonight's chosen subject, which is the changing nature of work. But also we're hoping that you'll jump in, you'll heckle, and you'll say rubbish, or you'll bring experiences and thoughts along the way. And in the past, we get some great involvement. So we're aiming to do that. So put your comments in the chat box as we go. And we've already posted a question up there, which is, where in the world are you right now and how are you feeling? And Annabel normally likes a bit of alliteration, so type in the chat box where you are in the world and how you're feeling.
We've already got Marjorie dialing in from Paris. Welcome, Marjorie. Feeling great, and the weather's lovely. Emma Bridger in Hastings, Hayley in Birmingham and feeling good. Vicky is in Colchester and feeling great, although I'm sure even better if I were in Paris. Nicely put. Amy's in Kent, Amy with a double E, feeling a bit tired, but the sun is out. Charlotte Littlejones in Brighton, yay, same as me. Wish I were in Paris too. 2 votes for Paris. Emma Corbett is in North London, feeling tired but inspired. Ooh, let's hope we don't dull that feeling. Charlotte Turnbull is in Cambridge and feeling excited for the weekend. And Bossero is in London feeling good and feeling Christmassy. Oh no, he's changed. He's now love is love. Even better. And we've got Amy in Cookham feeling shattered but happy. I know she's got 2 small beings in her care, so not surprising. Any others? In Jeddah and loving it from Hamza. Great stuff. I'm feeling bullish in Brighton. Liam, how are you feeling?
I'm in Rickmansworth and I'm feeling rested.
Marvelous.
That could have gone badly wrong, couldn't it? So there we go. So welcome to the people who've just joined us, Jackie, Laura and Sarah. Hello, good to see you. Thanks for popping your camera on, Sarah. That was going to be my next request. If you get a chance and you can pop your camera on, it just helps the flow of everything. So and no need to apologize, Sarah, for being a little late. You only missed me rambling, so you know you've not missed that much. So there we go. In a moment, we're going to be asking you another question in the chat box. We're going to ask you to tell us how you think workplaces are changing. So get your thinking caps on, and that question will go in the chat box in a minute or two. So we'll be asking you to comment on that. And the last thing I just want to point out is that if you have the urge to really say something, really want to get our attention, there's the facility to raise your hand, and that's in the reactions box along the bottom toolbar. So stick your hand up, give us a wave. Waving your hand in real life doesn't seem to work that well because you may not get noticed. So use the chat box. And again, Laura, Jackie, Emily, Megan, do feel free to turn your cameras on if you get a chance. That would be great. It's great to see you. So finally, just to let you know, we're recording the session. So just so you know that it will be available on the PRCA website later. So just to let you know that as we go. Let's now get down to the nitty-gritty of introducing our guests. So I'm just going to post a question in the chat box while we are so we have a look at that while I'm introducing the guests. So there's the question in the chat box, so start typing your thoughts in there. So today we're going to be focusing on how workplaces are changing, and we're going to look at actually the evolving nature of our role as communicators in that. So, and it's good to see we've got a really good cross-section of people here with us today. So the aim is to get a conversation flowing between the guests, and the lineup begins with, first off is Emma Bridger. Emma's a psychologist who runs People Lab. Hi, Emma. And that she's been advising organisations on employee engagement and experience for a while. Emma's been head of IC in large organisations before setting up shop as a consultant. And many will have seen her books on engagement and on employee experience. And in your spare time, you're a bit of a rocker, aren't you, Emma? Didn't you used to be in a band?
I did, yeah. I was.
What kind of band?
It was actually more indie kind of pop, and yeah, the band was called Formula One in the 90s, and my kids are so unimpressed by this, but we played Reading Festival a couple of times, and we had like a load of singles and an album out, and we were in the NME, got a single of the week and all that sort of stuff, and my kids could not care less. One of them wears a t-shirt, he quite likes the merch, but they're not interested in the actual music itself. But it's interesting because I think after doing that for a few years, then going into the corporate world, you know, after dealing with sort of celebrities, not that we were that famous, we were kind of probably D-list, I guess, but after dealing in the, you know, the world of celebrity, kind of dealing with chief executives felt like a breeze. So it gave me good training for my in-house corporate career, actually being in the music industry.
Fantastic. Oh, Annabel, you're a bit of a musician on the quiet.
Yes, cue the saxophone, might play later if we run out of things to chat about. But I'm introducing our next guest, and that's Marjorie Mahalingam, who is in Paris, where we all want to be, clearly, Marjorie. So thank you for joining us from France. And you have American and Indian heritage, I understand. I was hoping to conduct the interview in French, but we'll stick to English.
Sorry about that.
And you run the communications for Valeo. And for those of you who don't know that company, it's an enormous entity, employing 115,000 people. So thank you, Marjorie, for sparing some time for us 27 here today. Your career has included stints in banking and booze, but tell us what it's like in France. Give us the pulse of how the French workplace is adapting to new life.
It's been a real struggle. That's a very serious question following on Emma's very light rocker question. Life is difficult. The French are very old school, as I discussed with Liam a while ago. And so working from home has been a big struggle over the last, year and a half. And so now that we are luckily mask-free outside and people can go back to work, so everyone is literally racing into the office every day. There are limits. Not everyone can go in, but there is a real desire to come back. For the sense of community, something that we'll touch on a little bit. The French really like being together and need to be able to share. And so being trapped inside has been very difficult for business overall. So we are very hopeful that hopefully the vaccination will continue to roll out and we will go back to life as normal, AKA before COVID times.
Okay, we'll come on to more of that, but thank you, Marjorie. Back to Liam.
All right, and Bossoro commented that he's flagged himself up as a Frenchie who's saying he appreciates how difficult the situation was in France. It's a very office culture, isn't it? We'll pick up on that in a bit. And last but certainly not least, we are super lucky to have signed up from Costa Coffee, Charlie and Magadah-Williams. Hello, Charlie. How you doing? And we must have met a million years ago, when you were probably still at school then, I guess, when you ran internal comms and engagement at Costa. You just joined from doing HR stuff with the police, haven't you, in Bedfordshire? And then since then, you've progressed through the heady ranks of business partnering in HR and talented organisation effectiveness, and now you're the head of global culture, inclusion and diversity at Costa. And that's an international role. So people here, particularly those in the UK, will think of Costa as being a British brand, but that actually is massive around the world, isn't it?
It is, yeah. We're huge now. We're in 30. I'm going to make it up, we're in 35-ish countries. I think it changes up and down. And now that we're owned by Coca-Cola, it's just ever growing. So we've got into markets we've never really seen. So, 18. I'm going to make this up. There's about 18,000 people in total we employ, I think, and about 15,000 of those are in the UK.
And then there's any idea how big the whole franchise world is, because that's the other part of the gig, isn't it?
It is, and franchising is really interesting. So again, in the UK, our franchise business is about as big as our equity business. If you were going to add up our headcount around the world, I think we're about 40,000, something like that.
That's an awful lot of coffee makers, I guess.
Loads of coffee. There's never too much coffee.
There's never too much coffee. Yeah, fantastic. Oh, brilliant. So we're going to talk to you a little bit later. Annabel, is much coming through on the chat at the moment?
Yeah, Sarah's referring to what life is like as we build back. She's saying build back better, not a return to normal, which I quite agree with, but taking the positives from remote working and including in the hybrid working model. So I think there's some nodding heads there. Hayley saying it's forced organisations to make progress more quickly. Absolutely, it's really brought the agenda forward on a lot of stuff, flexible working particularly, to think about different ways that we can work. It's forced us to be more open to possibilities. Again, I've seen that reflected in work I'm doing about teams being much more agile and willing to take risks and do things differently because we've had to. Vicky Davis saying, great question. I worked for an arm's length body to the Department of Health Education England, real rise in listening to staff, music to my ears, from the perspective of working from home and their well-being and future of work. And surveys, hooray, increase in staff networks to embrace and lead on EDI, launched in Faith Network last week, but have many more. So Vicky, yes, thank you. We might spotlight you later to comment further. And then Amy EE, changes had to happen faster. There's more flexibility now. Technology's been embraced. I feel there are real positives and we can have better work-life balance. And I think, just to add to that, that people are really being able to bring their real selves to work now because of the mental health impact. I think leaders are much more on it and aware. So as you're in your comms role, that's really key that you keep pushing that agenda to continue to listen to employees.
Yeah, I think we'll pick some of that up actually when we speak later to Charlie, because we had a great conversation about that this afternoon actually. But Emma, can I ask you, because there's been quite a lot of chat and it was mentioned here, people talking about hybrid working. That's come up quite a lot actually. You spend a lot of time talking to HR directors around the place. What kind of stuff what's your take on things when people talk about hybrid working?
Great question. I think the first thing is, it's not actually new, is it? Right. So lots of us have been working in a hybrid way for many, many years. The difference is now we are intentionally designing hybrid working approaches. And I think traditionally, when we talk, well, not even traditionally, but in the last 12 months, if you like, we talk about hybrid, people always go straight to location, like office versus away from office, whatever that means for you. But I think we can actually look at it as more multidimensional than that. So we can look at things like time. So hybrid working really is just about flexibility, right? That's what we're talking about. So flexibility in where we work, the location, but also about when we work. So do we have to do 9 to 5? Can we flex that? And also get kind of deep into the world of HR here, but what about the work that we do? So there's a concept we use in the world of HR and people things, which is called job crafting. So do we have to really stick to the kind of the job role we've been given, or are there ways we can kind of tweak and change our job so it suits us, suits our strength, or helps the organisation? So there are lots of different ways we can come at hybrid working. And I think what we've seen is that there's a real kind of conflict here, because its very nature, hybrid is about flexibility. So the minute you kind of put a process or a procedure in place, you straight away taking out flexibility, right? You're sort of saying, right, let's do, I don't know, some of the big banks saying we want you in the office 3 days a week. And suddenly, is that really hybrid? So there's lots of conversation about what does it mean, what's going to work for the organisation, and how do we do it? How do we do it so it's equitable and fair? Because obviously fairness is a huge area, huge topic now over the last 12 months. And the minute we start mandating what hybrid looks like, we kind of take away some of that fairness. So there's lots of conversations about how do we do this and get this right, and no easy answers, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I was quite intrigued that you mentioned fairness, because I was speaking to Charlie this afternoon. And can I just jump in with Charlie and just say, because you mentioned to me, you've got people working in offices, but the vast majority of your workforce are out, have to be in a shop serving coffee. I mean, that's a big concern for you, isn't it, Costa?
I think, yeah, it's something that we're really aware of. I mean, whilst we're talking about for our people because actually in some of our markets, people have been in the office the whole way through, but we haven't in the UK, and we're now in that kind of in a bit of a trial around it. And the real steer from my boss's boss, our chief people officer, has been, the majority of our people have had to go to work. And actually, as somebody called me up on this the other day, we've all been working. We're not going back to work. We're going back to the office. It's not the same thing. But all that aside, our people in stores, apart from when they were furloughed for a little while, they've been in customer-facing situations the whole way through, and kind of have to bear that in mind. It's I think, whilst I really liked what Emma was saying around hybrid and the kind of the real nature of the fact that you can't attach a model to something that is inherently flexible. That doesn't make any sense, and that's where we're at with our trial, is really thinking about how do you give flexibility within a bit of a framework that means we can see results.
Yeah, because and I think that kind of ties back to the other thing that I've heard you, Emma, talk about quite a lot lately, which is the employee experience. And I guess those are kind of two related things, but I mean, that's something that has been puzzling me a little bit, is when people talk about employee experience, is that just another kind of buzzword that people use to describe a kind of an HR fad, in the way that I think hybrid working is kind of one of these kind of lumpy terms that's being chucked around, and actually no one really quite knows what it means. But what do people mean when they talk about employee experience in your experience?
In my experience, yeah. So obviously an experience is something that makes you feel something, good, bad or ugly. That's the kind of definition of an experience. Obviously an employee experience is stuff that happens to our people at work that makes them feel something, and that can feel quite overwhelming when you look at that. Well, it's everything, isn't it? So what we do is really use a kind of range of very practical tools to help you get to the heart of those moments that really matter for your people. And going back to the point about, Charlie was talking about your workforce, Charlie, a lot of them don't have the luxury of hybrid working because they have to be in a location. I think there's a real knowledge worker bias that we have in terms of, things like tech. Everyone talks about tech is so important for the EX, and I'm not saying that it's not relevant, absolutely, but there's so many people that do jobs where tech just doesn't even come into it. Talking about Telford before, when we were in the kind of warm up, and one of our clients, they make cast iron pipes in a foundry in Telford. The tech doesn't feature in their EX at all. I always talk about the days when I was a student and I was trimming lettuces on a farm. Tech didn't feature then, and I guarantee won't feature now in terms of my experience at work. And going back to hybrid, we talk about this idea of like hybrid and location and in the office, out the office, but I think there are as many, if not more, jobs that people do where that is not an option. If you're working the checkout in Sainsbury's, or or you're working for Royal Mail, you don't have a choice about where you work. You've got to be in a certain location, and you might not have a choice about when you work. So the opportunity for hybrid might be going back to job crafting. Can you craft your job to sort of have some flexibility in that? So there is opportunity there. And then going back to the employee experience, we look at it as kind of intentionally, the key word is intentionally designing experiences for people that deliver engagement. So really thinking about the experience from the point of view of the person we're designing for. So taking the best of like user experience and customer experience, which are kind of light years ahead of what we do to our people, right? And say, what can we learn from those practices to really get it right with our people? Because we know the evidence is absolutely, huge, that we know if we get it right with our people and we design, create and deliver great experiences for them, then they are going to want to stay. They're going to want to talk positively about us. They're going to want to be nice to customers. They're going to want to sell more. They're going to be engaged. So it's kind of, it's a no-brainer really, but we're, traditionally the human resources. I mean, what's that all about? We need to talk about people experience or employee experience. Let's think about their experience and get rid of some of those biases that we have around what we think will work for people.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that a large chunk of what you're describing are things that are within the kind of the gift or the drive of your classic, HR function, making sure people are paid right and looked after and well. But so what's typically the role of good internal comms people in driving a great employee experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've got a model I can share with you afterwards, which just kind of tried to make sense of the EX landscape for people, because it's really overwhelming. It sort of talks about going from those kind of really fundamental, what we call hygiene experiences, like getting paid on time. And those experiences, you want them to be frictionless, right? You don't even want to notice them, right? Going through to kind of those intentionally designed experiences that might sit in HR, like your onboarding experience is the classic one. Going through to what we call more everyday experiences. I think this is the place where internal comms has a real role to play. And actually, when we look at those everyday experiences, so how does the culture feel? When I walk through the doors, people friendly, are they nice because it's a good culture? Are the values lived? Are they breathed? You know, those sorts of things. So the say and the do match. Actually, those are the experiences that really make the biggest difference. That's where you find those moments that matter that I talked about. Yeah. So we can put a lot of effort into, into something like the onboarding experience, and we do. But actually, I think the biggest opportunity is in the space where people like internal comms play. So things like culture, values, the way it feels to work around here. Employee voice, we've talked about that already. Do I feel listened to? Does anyone care what I've got to say? Employee voice is way more than just having a place to go to kind of type your thoughts or something. It's about genuinely feeling like somebody cares about what you're saying. So I think those are all the spaces where internal comms can really add some value to the experience.
Yeah.
So Marjorie, you were nodding when Emma was mentioning a couple of points back. Can I bring you in at this point? Oh, you're on mute. The classic, you're on mute.
Sorry, I had unmuted myself. I don't know how I went back onto mute. I feel like you touched on a lot of points, and it's a little bit off script. So guys, feel free to bring me back. But one of the things,
no, I'm used to Annabel. You'll make Annabel happy.
Okay, great. Well, the whole notion of hybrid working. So once again, as someone who does pure IC, one of the things that I find interesting, and what you were just talking about, Emma, rather, was this employee experience. And it's true, we look at it really from a knowledge worker perspective, right? Because there's so few people, and at Valeo, so our Annabel mentioned that, it's 115,000 people, but we have 70,000 engineers and 45,000 production line workers. So that becomes really, in this whole notion of fairness is actually something that I deal with on a daily basis, because there is sort of, and Liam and I were talking about this, the haves and the have-nots. So those who have been able to be at home, 45,000 other people had to go into the office to make car parts. And part of something that's always made me uncomfortable about the hybrid experience, despite that I'm enjoying being in, the luxury of my home right now, is that I find it to be profoundly individualistic, because in the end, it's about me, myself, and I, not about a collective employee experience. It's my experience in the company. And so how to create an employee experience, to come back to sort of the culture, if everyone is at home. And even if we have this hybrid experience, that means you never have everyone at the same time. So it's difficult to create that link, which was something that, was sort of the question that I was going to talk about. But I find really interesting based on what you were saying, because it becomes difficult to create a culture when not everyone is there. When people go and come, to create relationships with people, because let's face it, I'm perfectly happy to be participating in this from France and seeing you all, but there really is nothing like sitting together with a drink in person. So I don't know what your feeling sort of is on that, Emma, because that brought up a lot of things that I hadn't actually touched my finger on, but that had made me feel very uncomfortable for quite some time.
Yeah, I think what I think is really interesting about this experience we're going through is it's like this mass global experiment, the like of which we will hopefully, touching wood, will never go through again. And we're kind of just learning on the hoof, right? And I think what's really interesting and quite exciting, if I could say that, hopefully I don't think that's insensitive, because we've all had people who've suffered through this, but it's that there isn't a playbook, there's no best practice, we're figuring it out together, and the playing field's been leveled, which I think is a good thing. And I guess my reflection on what you've just said is that there are those organisations who are and have always been completely remote. I can't think of the brands offhand, but I'm sure someone else can jump in and remind me, who they've developed their culture to be, we don't have a workplace, we all work from home, wherever it might be. But the point is that was very intentionally designed from the off, and the playing field was level. And it's a little bit like, I'm sure some of you have had this, when we've run events face-to-face, brilliant. When we've run events online, actually surprised at how well they can work. We put a lot of effort into making them work, but they work really well. Where it doesn't work is where we've got some people on Zoom and some people in a room together, and then suddenly you get that them and us thing again, and the people in the room are starting to talk to each other. I think that's what we've got on a bigger scale with hybrid. We've got some people on the Zoom, some people in the room, and we're starting to see that inequity happen. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but we need to kind of figure that out.
But to come back just quickly to what you're saying in terms of companies that were built based on, remote culture. My sister works for a remote company, and I have a very good friend who worked for a remote company. And in all honesty, they basically enjoy it for a few years and then people move on. People don't have a tendency to stay for the long term because you don't have that connection. It's nice to be at home by yourself, but bringing people together once a year isn't really enough to make you want to stay in a company, which is why, the big US tech companies are telling everyone to come back to the office because that connection is no longer there. Because if at the end of the day, and then we'll eventually come around to the IC part of it, is what is the difference between working at Google versus working at Facebook versus working anywhere else? If there's no corporate culture, you just go wherever the money is, or it's not. I think something that a lot of people forget about, and we've discussed a bit in France, and I saw a little bit in HBR, is the fact that when things go completely remote, that also means that companies can look for the cheapest labor. So we also forget that this luxury of being able to do whatever you want, well, there's also the side, if the moment a company says we can take anyone from anywhere, well, they can also say we can reduce our costs by hiring, let's face it, in countries where it costs less. Or in the US, as an American, someone in Wisconsin, their salary is going to be significantly less than a salary in San Francisco. You can basically hire 2 to 3 more people if you start looking for employees elsewhere in other parts of the country.
Can I jump in here, Marjorie?
Yes. Sorry.
No, it's really stimulating, but I want to make sure that we bring it back to people can relate it to their experience. And one thing I'm interested in, with a globally dispersed workforce as you have, what differences in your approach to communication can you describe on the basis we have got this, this changing, having to adapt? For example, have you got an EVP, an employee value proposition in project in play to try and address, trying to keep a cohesive culture?
So I'd like to say there was a magic solution and, there was a big surprise here, but we've actually gone back to fundamentals. So I essentially call it the 3 C's. So content, campaigns, and channels, basically. So, and when I talk about content, it's just lots and lots and lots of articles or videos. But I will admit we do more articles than videos because articles are faster. They don't need to be long, but what we've noticed is since people are far away, there's this desperate need for information. And, if for those who aren't at work every day, they don't have that cascading down. So, I do lots of change management communication because, to come back to one thing we were talking about earlier, in terms of tools, and yes, okay, it's been great because this has forced people from a tool perspective now to be on Zoom, or we use the Google Suite. But actually, even though we have engineers, they really struggled with the Google Suite. And so we've been doing lots of, sort of like tutorials and fun ways to learn all the great things you can do with the Google Suite, how to make your remote work experience all better. Lots of actually sort of fun content around that works really, really well because they're desperately in need of it. And then we've been doing a lot of human pieces and giving that. I am a firm believer in sort of the employee voice and giving a voice to our employees. And so we've done loads of interviews with employees across the globe and across our business groups because people want to see what other people are doing. And to, even in terms of like evolution, since people haven't known where they're going to go, it's like, well, we're starting to talk about, as a big company, every summer we've got career aspirations, but it used to be you're in the office. So you could kind of figure out, like, talk to people, well, what could be your next step? And that's not there anymore. So I'm trying to also shine more light on what are the different professions that people can potentially look at.
And give me an example of what's worked really well and perhaps in retrospect you would have scrapped. So what have been the highlights and lowlights of approaches you've taken?
Oh yeah, what's worked really well are quizzes. Stupid quizzes, like, 4 questions. Do you know the answers to this? People don't necessarily like the article, but everyone does them. So that shows that people like it. And just this success overall, we get thousands of hits on articles purely about people. Like, what do you do? Where are you from? What are your, what do you actually like to do with your free time? I call them dumb content. It's just like useless, but because it's so human driven, those are the ones that get tons of hits. Then the compliance stuff, no one reads. We have to do them because we have to publish them. But, if we get 100 reads, that's, I wish we could not waste time doing that because no one's going to open it in the first place. And then there's been a lot of exchanges. So the campaign aspect, actually working with people on the ground. So I have a network of 350 comms people. And so we just finished a photo shoot across the globe. So we went and did to 10 different countries and took pictures of people, and they love that. And so we're going to be rolling out a campaign about these pictures. And we took a bunch of pictures of different people, not just the people who were selected. I really noticed in a company, and we're, an engineering / production company, and yet that and products, they want to know what are the products that we're selling, where can they have an impact as well, because that also affects business. In the automotive industry, business is really tough. Our margins are really low. They want to make sure we're going to actually keep having business.
And if you could, sorry to talk over,
yeah,
a lot I want to ask and not much time.
Yeah.
So if you could reflect on you as a communicator, have you changed in any way? So if we could flash back 18 months and then come back to today, would you say as a leader in comms that you've changed your approach, your style, your aspirations?
No, I would actually say I've become even more pragmatic than I was before. It's, we go and literally look and see what works on the internet, which we use a lot. And instead of wasting time doing all sorts of new sort of content forms that agencies had wanted to sell us in the past, and which I loved, but they require a lot of time and effort and money. And at the end of the day, they didn't work much better. All the sort of snacking content and infographics and things like that. At the end of the day, that wasn't any better than an article because people just want information fast. So it's better to get things out than to do some, beautiful design infographic that takes us 3 weeks to do.
Okay, that's very honest. Liam, I saw a lot of activity going on in the chat function. Anything to pick up particularly on Marjorie's points raised there? Thank you, Marjorie.
Well, I was quite, one thing I was going to ask Marjorie, actually, have you gone down the app route then on dealing with people's requirements?
Yes, so we've started working on it. It's very difficult to connect the non-connected because we don't have a bring your own device policy right now. IT is looking into it, which means that we can't really connect everyone to date, but we're hoping by the end of the year that we will have that in place so that we can connect the non-connected. But I will say the non-connected actually we ran a survey to see who actually wanted it. Yeah. I phrased it differently because my feeling is we needed to be able to connect people. We need to provide them information. When we had furloughs, we needed to be able to reach out to them, not on WhatsApp. So it's more a must-have channel than really do people really want it. And there's a lot of resistance to it because when you're a production line worker, basically you don't want information outside of your hours. So, you're paid when you're paid, and outside of that, you're off duty. But there is this need to be able to communicate with them, even though they don't want the same information, which also becomes difficult when you've got two distinct populations. I presume Charlie has a fairly similar situation where, engineers want really technical top-down information, and people on the ground just want to know what hours they need to be in the building. It's very different. But they do like the human ones. They love when they get a shout out. We've got a worker in the US who's been working for us for 40 years. That article had tons and tons and tons of hits. People are really proud of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm going to come to Charlie in a second, but I think Sarah's been chipping in quite a lot, and one of the things points that she made earlier on as well is actually looking at people's location as a different type of experience in the nature they want to have. And she talked about, we say to people, when you come to the office, that's your time to connect, and we want to think about connection time, whereas at home it's time for other types of work and stuff. But I think that point about tailoring your information needs to what people want is really crucial. And Charlie, can I just come to you, because you've got a really quite interesting workforce, haven't you? You've obviously got your corporate type sitting in head office in Dunstan, but then you've got this kind of quite, tell us a bit more about your workforce, because they are quite an interesting mix.
It is interesting. I mean, we've got, I guess, three main groups of people, which would be, as you say, the corporate group, who are very not corporate because we just sit around drinking coffee and eating cake all day, so pretty friendly. And then you have people who work in a store environment, and they'll be anything from a barista to a store manager. And then we also have engineers, so we have people who and kind of brand coaches and so on, who work on our Costa Express side of the business. So they're really different populations to communicate with. I mean, it's been a while since that was what I was doing, but you're never far away from it with culture and I&D. So it's I think I really resonate with some of the things that you were just saying there, Marjorie, around trying to get the information that they want out to the right populations. And actually, it's one of the things that I do notice when you spoke about connecting the non-connected. That's one thing I really see with the work that we do around inclusion and diversity, where actually the more informal I&D chats are where you pick up some of those non-connected people.
Yeah.
How you kind of pull them back in.
Yeah, because I think you've mentioned before that as the demographics of your workforce changes, their expectations of what Costa Coffee does as a company has evolved and somewhat. You can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this change massively. I've been with Costa now for 9 years, and I mean, now we at last check, our predominant workforce is women, so we have a big majority female workforce around the world. I think we employ people in the UK, Poland, Latvia and China, and we've got about 68% of our workforce is women. And a large percentage of those, the majority in our store, certainly 17 to 24s. So their demands on the company they work for, I mean, they're quite fierce, which I quite like. So they are, you kind of sense a bit of activism coming through. They have a real need to see purpose, and we're actually seeing that come through in the workforce in China more now. So where people in China very much they went to work to get paid, they would change their job frequently. It was not a place where people would necessarily be interested in staying with a business because they loved it. Much more now, you kind of see people looking for a sense of purpose, and that being a really, really big thing, and kind of expecting a company to stand for something is something that I really see coming through.
I mean, because you've been through quite a big change. I mean, you've grown a lot in those 9 years, and I remember having conversations with the head of HR 9 years ago, and she was getting worried about staff posting things on a Facebook site about when you work at Costa Coffee, and it was pictures of people doing coffee art and occasionally saying nasty things about how annoying customers were. But so presumably that's completely changed. The organisation has gone a lot more with the flow of getting people talking and listening.
Well, the Facebook group's still there, and we still don't manage it. And now I think there's 22,000 people on there, and it's run by a girl in Australia who doesn't work for us anymore. And we're kind of quite chilled out about it because actually the insight that comes through it is invaluable, and they self-regulate really well. We have moved on definitely with our use of social media. I mean, nobody's got the silver bullet for this stuff, right? I know every time I remember joining any conversation as a comms person, you're kind of waiting to hear, what are you doing that's working in this space? I think the thing that I've seen work best is not trying to have one approach for everybody, because you won't get to everybody that way. Actually, I think something that the last kind of couple of years have taught me is around how far you can push the needle. So when you think about it, there are many organizations that would never have done things digitally, and part of the reason they wouldn't have done that is because the people who make the decisions, or the people who you need to speak, are afraid of it, or aren't confident with those skills, or don't have the ability, or don't want to look like they're not very good at something, so they didn't do it. And then now they have to do it, right? We all have to do it. So I remember we were going through with a friend, we were going through an adoption, and we went to court from her living room, and the team said to us beforehand, this would never have happened. It's gone through, it would have taken years to get here. So I guess now, how do we take that energy and keep moving?
Mm-hmm. So, and then So obviously your role running diversity and inclusion is still quite recent. I mean, how do you approach that in Costa, this global company?
That's a very, very good question. Well, I think the biggest thing for us is and I know I said this to you before, we stopped talking in the main around protected characteristics. We still have our network groups. I chair one of them. We have areas where we know that we need to focus our attention, but inclusion means being inclusive to everybody. So actually, as soon as you start to try and separate people out, I think it doesn't work. So we talk about it much more around actually making sure that everybody feels included in terms of the fact that they are involved in influencing the business, and that we include the new person and the older person who doesn't get the joke, and everybody who might be in a situation where actually perhaps someone doesn't feel comfortable with the technology they're using or whatever that might be. And I think, sorry, my doorbell is going, but I don't need to answer it. That's handy. My wife will go. I think trying to, again, I'm working with a global audience, but the majority of my people are in the UK, and I have to be aware of that. So we try to listen to what they want. I think that's a really great starting point. You can write an inclusion and diversity strategy that would fit any business. The trick is really going, okay, but what does this business need? So some of that's about data, and I know you love data. I love data. Getting data is hard, but the best way to get that is through building trust. So that's a big area of focus. And I think storytelling, I do not need to try and convince this group of people that storytelling is a wonderful thing. But I think there's something in the things that you say in the subtext that make people trust you. So that might mean that you get people putting their pronouns on things. And people often say, well, why do I need to put my pronouns? I don't need people to refer to my pronouns. Because it makes it okay for somebody else to do it, because it tells that person that actually you're someone who are up for a conversation. Starting off a session, we did a session the other day and someone encouraged me to, and I should have said it today actually, we kicked off with an audio description, and it's not something that I would think of because it's not something that I need, but other people do. So there are signals you can give that say this is a place where everybody is not just welcome, but included. And it's not the same.
That's really interesting, Charlie. Whilst you've been chatting, Vicky has written some comments. Vicky, can I shine the light on you, and if you unmute and just share your thinking around the EDI agenda particularly? I asked the question in the chat, has the pandemic stalled initiatives that might be taking place? But everyone's come rushing back saying, no, it's soaring. So tell me more, Vicky.
Right, so I work for Health Education as a public sector body, and I've just found since last March it's been really soaring from the proliferation of awareness days that we're trying to lead and communicate on, from the increase in actually our colleagues saying, oh, have you heard about this awareness day? What are we doing about it corporately? So that challenge back, that's really increased. The rise in our staff networks, which of course are a fantastic thing to do, but then that's that stretch on your communications teams who are only small, about how to support the networks in communicating some of their discussions back out to the whole organisation. So yeah, it's just really big. Space on our intranet, for example, as well. So the rise in all of these networks and groups has a huge pressure on us as a team to have that open, transparent view of the world and in sharing all of that rich content and what people are doing. Hugely challenging, honestly. We're really struggling.
I hear Vicky struggle. Charlie, any top tips for Vicky and other internal communicators on how to approach this?
I think the fact that you're aware of them and you're giving them support is massive. I agree. For us, it's been the same. And I mean, we were a bit ahead of the curve around well-being, but that obviously really took off. What I did see was a real swell of activity from our networks, which then got to a point where everybody was feeling a bit frustrated, because actually they got to a point of saying, you know what, we love this, we're passionate about this, but we want to take action. And I think they're coming back and joining it. And actually the business were doing things, we weren't talking about them very well. And some of that's because we weren't finished. There were things that were in progress, they weren't polished, they weren't perfect yet. And we were scared that if we said, well, we're working on this, but we're not doing a great job, it might not come across very well. And actually, that's one of the real learnings for me, is it doesn't need to be perfect. You know, just go for it. Say, we're working on this. We know that we're not, this is not complete yet. Help us to get it right. You know, I set up, we did some disability awareness learning recently, and I've created a kind of interactive toolkit. And we put at the end of it, if there's more things that you think we can do differently, email me. Not me personally, please don't email me personally about this, because I'll get 18,000 emails, but here's the email address. Get in touch, tell us what else we can do, you know, help us to create the solutions. There's, just as a really practical thing, there's a TED talk that I love by a lady called Valerie Alexander. And she talks about outsmarting your unconscious bias. Very, very cool lady. And I often start, when I speak about inclusion in some of our meetings, I'll kick off with this TED talk and just do the first kind of 7 minutes, up to the point where she talks about being a ninja, because it makes everyone laugh, but it's true. But she talks about the physiological reaction that you have when you're facing somebody different to you, and the experience we have. So it's the whole fight and flight thing. But actually, you know, she talks about how, whilst that's kept us alive centuries, actually now it's not helpful. You need to put yourself into situations, you need to normalize things, you need to experience them, so that you don't then become part of the problem. So as communicators, that would be a massive tip for me, is if you don't feel connected to the work that's going on in these groups, you know, I know Liam was saying when we were talking about it, you know, he would always say to people, get to know your audience. I'm sure that's something that we would all want to do. It can feel hard when you don't feel like you understand that audience. You know, I have people come to me and say, I really want to be welcoming to somebody from the trans community, but I feel a bit nervous because I don't really know what to say, and I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to upset somebody. But actually, and it's as an example, you know, maybe I don't understand some of the religious festivals that happen and I feel stupid asking the question, but actually to role model curiosity, I think, is a beautiful thing. And to be able to say, I do it all the time. I go and say, explain this to me. I don't celebrate this particular thing. I'd love to understand why does that happen like that? And why do you eat this? And where does that come from? And once you start doing it, people do it too. It's nice and easy. It's just, you know, but you've got that power.
That's really helpful. Great top tip there. And would you mind sharing, Charlie, that link, or at least the name of the TED Talk? Because that's a really nice, it's a safe way in a way to put something on the table for people to then discuss and open up the conversation. So brilliant idea. And Marjorie, I know you raised your hand. Would you be able to give us your thoughts? And Charlie, would you be able to mute?
Oh, no, it's Emma who raised her hand.
I beg your pardon. I saw a hand earlier from you.
Yeah, it's me. Yeah, no, thanks, Charlie. I love that. And I was just going to jump in with my psychologist hat on, just a couple of points, and just talk about the neuroscience behind some of this. Is really interesting around things called mirror neurons, and the way that even when we hear a story about something that's not in our own experience, it can trigger the same reactions if we're going through it ourselves. So storytelling, role modeling, absolutely critical. But I've mentioned personas, and I'm just going to mention it again because I think they're a really powerful tool for internal communicators. And sometimes I get a little bit of pushback. People say, well, why would you use personas? It's putting people in a box. But actually, that's not the point of personas. Personas are evidence-based. They're based on real data that we gather from our employee population, and we use them to describe usually behavioural characteristics of groups of employees. But the point of personas is that they hold our hand in being more empathic, and something we're not always great at in organisations. And comms, you know, in particular, I know when I was in house, we kind of just treated everyone the same because we hadn't got time to segment or do anything differently. And I think if you get a really good set of employee personas, it just really kind of gets you in the habit of just thinking about, what would this feel like for this group of people? How would this group of people react to this? What would their pains and gains be? I think it just gets you into that really good practice of being more empathic, which obviously is a great step towards building trust, building inclusion, and really considering what it's like for the people that you're designing your internal comms for. And yeah, it'd be great if we're at the point of, you know, consumer grade tech where we can hyper personalize everything, but we're not there yet. So I think personas is a really good first step as a thinking tool to be more empathic. So if you haven't got personas, I think they're a brilliant tool for internal communicators. And again, happy to share more info on that. I've got loads of stuff on that I can share with you.
Yeah, I think it's worth flagging up. I mean, because I think this come up a few times on Chat Connect. I mean, the IT function wouldn't dream of rolling out a new IT platform, and our marketing colleagues wouldn't dream of, you know, launching a new product without actually looking at the potential users and customers and the people who use them. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think more and more people are starting to talk about using them. That's quite a powerful one.
We've got Hamza with his hand raised in the dark. There we go.
Hello.
Oh, there
out
you
to the
are.
light. Out to the light. How do you
Show
do?
us your camera. Is it? Oh, it's still got issues.
It has issues. It's got this computer. I bought it. It's a new computer, but for some reason this thing doesn't work. But it's fine. I'm going back to the store and throwing it at them.
Give us
But
your
anyway.
viewpoint. That's what we want to hear.
Excellent. So yeah, this has been a very interesting conversation. I love it, and so many hats are contributing to it. Yeah, and when I look at TV, when I watch TV, when I look at what's going on, what I'm seeing is polarization. What I'm seeing is conflict of values, right? And one thing that is missing is empathy, is understanding. Oi, we're all going through this human condition. If anything, Corona should have reminded us of that. Corona does not discriminate between, black or white or Jew or Gentile or man or woman. It doesn't make a difference. It kills us all. And that really brings us back to the conflict of humanity. Like, individualism can go so far before it breaks down. That's at least my understanding. Because how much are we going to segment people? For example, I think of myself as saying, okay, I am Hamza from the Arif family. I live in this district, in this room specifically, and this is my way of doing things. But then I look at myself and say, well, I'm bigger than that, aren't I? I am a circle within a circle within a circle of things. I am from Jeddah, from Saudi, from the Middle East, or from the Arab world, from the Eastern world, from the world, from Earth, things like that. Say, how many segmentations do we need?
Hamza, I would like you to write a thought piece after this session.
Oh, that's flattering. Thank you so much.
Please
that's so sweet of you.
Share it with us and we'll share beyond. But Charlotte, I thank you, Hamza. It's really, really lovely to have heard your voice, if not to have seen you without your camera. Charlotte, you wrote a lovely piece too as well, I guess resonating with Hamza. Can I bring you in just to reiterate what you've put in the chat there? Unmute you. There we go. Yeah.
Is that me? Sorry. Yes. Oh, well, there's more than one Charlotte.
Oh, sorry, Charlotte Little-Jones. Yes.
Yeah. No, I think in the past 17 months or whatever, as we've just heard, we recognise that people are different. They're not just at work. We see their personal lives. We've got a much better understanding of everybody's individual needs, and as internal communications, that means we've heard a lot from different people. We've heard people's, we've been trying to engage with staff on what are they nervous about coming back to campus. So it's surfacing lots of issues and hearing lots of perspectives that I think prior to we wouldn't have had time almost to think about because we're so busy doing our other stuff. But it's really important because when you're delivering comms to audiences who are anxious and nervous, you have to be listening and you have to be conscious of that kindness. And we're very much more about our values. We're thinking about how we manage people's return to, in our case, campus, because we're a university, and bringing in that kind of the research on kindness, so we can kind of really take it on board and take it down. So I think it's helped enormously in a way in terms of our perspective and how we treat our audiences. So.
Fantastic. Which campus, which university do you work for, Charlotte?
University of Sussex. Yeah.
Sussex. Okay, great. Any other thoughts? We've got just a few minutes left, and I'm conscious that we've brought in a few voices.
I just wanted to pick up a little, echo a little bit of what Charlotte said as well, which is a couple of conversations I've had recently. Is people seem increasingly intolerant of things which they consider to be unkind or lacking kind, things which historically would be being considered to be quite okay. The idea that you can't do banter in the workplace anymore. What's wrong with banter? Those ideas are that kind of an ingrained kind of institutional kind of toughness, and people's expectations have changed, haven't they, dramatically, to how we talk to them and how we reflect, and as Charlie used the phrase, how we show up as an organisation. And I think there is an expectation, I think, in organisations, in the workforce generally, that we are more gentle to each other, and there is a greater level of understanding of people's issues. I think that's a really important point.
Marvellous. So before you talked over me, Liam, I was just suggesting that there might be an opportunity for anybody, if they haven't had a chance to speak, if there's something burning to say or ask any of our panel. There's a couple of minutes left. Any thoughts? Hands up. Hamza has a question.
Not a question, more of a comment.
Okay.
It comes to me what Jesus Christ said, you know, when he was on the cross. It was like, God forgive them for they don't know. If we approach the world in that sense, a lot of ignorant people around us, you know, will not sound so triggering to us. They just don't know.
Yeah, I think
can't see it.
I think that's interesting that we don't know half the story, what other people are going through. So, and I think if the pandemic has shown me anything, is that empathy is absolutely the base way to communicate with anybody, to recognize that they might not be able to say it yet, but there's things going on underneath. People are dealing with challenges we know nothing about. So that empathy and kindness and authentic conversation, I think, is key as communicators. We are drawing to a close. We have 1 minute left and I like to finish on time. So I'm going to leap in and say thank you to all our guests, to Marjorie, Emma and to Charlie. Thank you so much for giving up your time when you've got a whole host of people you could be communicating with in your organisations. Thanks to everybody that attended tonight. Really lovely to see your happy, smiling, shiny faces. And we'll be sending out a 2-question pulse check after this, just to check your feedback and to get some input from you about what you'd like more of or less of in the future. And we also welcome suggestions for any future topics. So do use the pulse check to suggest that. And look out for the recording. Thanks to Kiri in the background there with his PRCA logo, and Ike, who's just joined the PRCA on the social media side. So thanks everybody. Have a fantastic evening ahead and see you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Thanks very much. And see you in the next one.